Is Saudi Arabia
But Saudi Arabia
of Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia
Saudi Arabia, would you say they're rich?
History is being made right in front of our eyes. On June 9, 2024, the long-standing petrodollar agreement between Saudi Arabia and the United States expired, and the Saudis announced that they would not renew the agreement. It would seem like just another economic ploy against the countries, but in fact, this is one of the key points in the global economy that could upend everything the agreement was about. 50 years ago, America came to visit Saudi Arabia and said, "Let's sell oil only for our dollars. In exchange, we will provide you with security, advanced weapons, and access to technology." The Saudis weighed the pros and cons and agreed. In 1974, the famous petrodollar pact between Saudi Arabia and the United States was signed, which essentially laid the foundation for the petrodollar system. If you want to buy oil, be kind enough to buy dollars from the United States first. By the way, what's coming when you hear the word currency? Most likely, many of you will think of the dollar, because for most people in the world, this image is now the main symbol of money. But this wasn't always the case. For example, if you asked someone to name the currency of the period from 1720 to 1815, people living at that time would probably name the French lira, because it was the French currency that had reserve status in those years. And in the period from 1815 to 1920, exactly the same question would have been answered by the British pound sterling. So, the dollar's current dominance in people's minds is only a consequence of historical and economic events. And what do you think? In 1944, countries signed the Bretton Woods Agreement, which essentially meant that the financial system would be tied to the dollar, and not just gold, as it had been before. And it's not like countries were so eager to support America in its growth. After World War II, U.S. were, in fact, the only stable superpower with a stable economy, and stability is exactly what all countries needed. After a difficult war period, it was time to get the international economy back on its feet, and the main condition for this is active trade. And so that countries could calmly exchange goods and services, they simply needed a common currency that suited everyone. Furthermore, the banking system in the U.S. was also the most stable during that period, so countries invested their wealth in dollars to protect their money from inflation. So it's not surprising that Japan, China, and Great Britain are among the largest holders of assets in the U.S. due to foreign exchange reserves, and that's from $7 to $8 trillion in total. But there was something else that helped America become the most significant superpower: control of global energy. Remember, in 1971, the U.S. unilaterally decided to print money without linking it to gold. That is, before, the dollar was generally unneeded. Everyone began counting in gold. Then, after 1944, the US dollar was made the world currency, but its exchange rate was still linked to gold, and this was a small problem. America didn't have enough gold to cover all the money they printed. That is, if all dollar holders came to the US and asked to exchange their savings for precious metal, the United States simply wouldn't have been able to. And you know what? In 1965, something similar happened. This stately Mr. Charles de Gaulle, a military and political figure, and at the time also the president of France, didn't particularly like the dollar's dominance, and he decided to demonstrate to everyone the currency's inadequacy. In 1965, de Gaulle officially demanded that U.S. President Lyndon Johnson exchange $1.5 billion for gold, accumulated in the National Bank of France. The rate at that time was $35 per ounce of gold, and it came out to a simply fantastic figure of 16.5 tons of gold, and that's almost 3/4 of the U.S. gold reserve. Imagine the reaction of the American government, and it was a completely coincidental coincidence that in a few years during the 1970s, America decided that it could do without gold completely. The U.S. unilaterally abolished the gold standard, and thus emerged a new currency system with a floating rate and the absolute primacy of the American currency. And was this even possible? Yes and no. In fact, this decision had tragic consequences. U.S. President Richard Nixon introduced reforms brazenly. He simply confronted the entire world with the fact that now no one could convert dollars into gold, and the value of the dollar was called into question. The economy was stagnant, inflation was rising, and of course, countries were massively worried, especially OPEC, because the overall value of oil contracts began to decline. A couple of years later, the Arab-Israeli War began, and Arab states were outraged that Western countries were supporting Israel in this conflict. Tensions rose to the point that in 1973, the Arab members of OPEC raised the price of crude oil by 70% and imposed an embargo on exports to the US and other countries. What do you think happened next? Of course, the oil crisis. Nixon urged citizens to conserve fuel and avoid unnecessary travel. Airlines were cutting back, and fuel prices were skyrocketing. The US urgently needed to do something. Remember that very agreement between America and Saudi Arabia that we talked about at the beginning? It became one of the key events in overcoming the oil crisis. Our home is your home. There's an Arabic proverb, the sands are blown away by the wind. I declare to you, the king, the fact that if the sands of time give us any hint of the future, it is that in the coming days, the friendship between the peoples of Saudi Arabia and America will grow stronger. We will become a powerful and vital force in the world. Unlinking the dollar from gold apparently was necessary to link to another resource in order to continue to maintain stability, and black gold, that is oil, came to replace gold. This was truly the greatest move in the global economy. Just think about how important this agreement was. The whole petrodollar idea was invented by Kissinger and Nixon. U.S. President Richard Nixon sent his Secretary of State and National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger to Saudi Arabia for a secret meeting. This meeting took place on a warship named Quincy. Very few records remain of it, but later the whole world learned that Nixon promised the King of Saudi Arabia weapons and protection in exchange for an agreement to sell oil only for dollars. This means that if countries want to trade the most important commodity of all, oil, then they need access to dollars. The ideal scenario is that from now on, the price of oil will be determined in US dollars, and it is this agreement between America and Saudi Arabia that has helped the United States dominate global trade and maintain its dollar as the reserve currency for over 75 years. It helped before, but then 2024 arrived, and the Saudi Arabian prince announced that he will not renew this fateful petrodollar contract. Needless to say, this is a very bad sign for the US. Furthermore, the Reuters agency reported that Saudi Arabia has joined the Chinese-led central bank project to create a digital currency, which could be another step towards reducing the volume of global oil trade in US dollars. This is not just a concept, because the MIJ project has reached the minimum stage, a viable product. This means the technologies are already working. However, you know what's especially noteworthy here? The Saudis are far from the first to decide on such actions. Abandoning dollars in international trade and oil transactions seems to be becoming a trend. For example, China and Russia have almost completely abandoned the dollar, and more than 90% of mutual settlements are conducted in national currencies. Just listen to what U.S. Congressman Thomas Macy says about the dollar situation on Tucker Carlson's podcast. And we can do this, as long as they use our currency. But I think that at some point this will come to an end. They're going to stop using our dollars as a reserve currency. I mean, I watched your interview with Putin. One of the things he said, and it's true, is that before we imposed sanctions on Russia, 70% of their transactions were made in US dollars. And after the sanctions were imposed, less than 20% of their transactions are made in US dollars. Ironically, every time the US government imposes new economic sanctions, the world moves one step closer to de-dollarization. And now is the time to mention another important news. The BRICS alliance is launching its BRICS Bridge payment system. It's still in the development stage, but the prospects for such a payment infrastructure are promising, because the alliance is striving to create a payment system based on digital currencies and blockchain. That is, transactions will be maximum protected and impersonal, which will help reduce the influence of other countries on international settlements. Yes, we are talking about the United States, of course. From 2010 to 2023, the ruble share in settlements for Russian exports has, almost tripled to 39. Together with foreign currencies, we will increase the use of national currencies in foreign trade settlements and improve the security and efficiency of such operations, including through BRICS, the formation of an independent payment system not subject to political pressure, abuses, and external pressure is being developed. Saudi Arabia wants to join BRICS. Yes, officially they are not yet in the union, but they are already actively participating in meetings, and according to Deputy Head of Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Sergei Rybko, they are working alongside everyone else. BRICS plans, it must be said, are impressive. Firstly, the alliance really wants to change the entire global financial system to increase its influence of developing countries and improve their access to international institutions, because it's obvious that under the current dollar system, every country is under the control of the US government, and this remains the greatest motivation for BRICS. Therefore, the creation of an independent payment system is an incredibly important step for all members of the alliance. Secondly, the BRICS countries will continue to promote the idea of creating statehood for Palestine in the conflict with Israel. Take a look at this map. Highlighted in green are countries that recognize Palestinian statehood. About 88% of the world's population live in these green areas. And by the way, almost all of these same countries also support de-dollarization and the growth of BRICS. The war in the Gaza Strip has become the latest political issue dividing BRICS, and the US will of course always support Israel, and BRICS will continue to defend statehood for Palestine. What do 88% of the world's population want? And the third important point in the plans of the BRIC Union is the lifting of US sanctions. All alliance ministers unanimously express outrage that unilateral Western sanctions are incompatible with the principles of the UN Charter and have a negative impact on economic growth, trade, energy, healthcare, and food security. The security of many countries, especially developing countries, is therefore increasingly of interest to many countries, since most want economic freedom, and therefore freedom from the dominance of the dollar, and the US certainly feels the end of its financial dominance. But is the American economy really based solely on the demand for its currency? What is this country's value to the global economy? Let's compare. China is famous for being essentially the world's factory. It produces and exports literally everything. Germany is known for its developments and high-quality production of BMW, Porsche, Mercedes. Japan is a major exporter of electronics, Toyota, and Honda cars in the best anime in the world. South Korea is known for its semiconductors. Samsung gadgets, Hyundai, and Kia cars are high quality. Saudi Arabia is famous for its oil, being one of the largest exporters of crude oil in the world. Russia is rich in natural resources, including gas, oil, coal, and other minerals. Brazil is known for its agriculture and is one of the largest exporters of soybeans, coffee, sugar, and beef. India is a major exporter of software, technology, and pharmaceuticals. Australia is also rich in natural resources, being a leading exporter of iron ore, coal, natural gas, and black opal. Canada is a major exporter of natural resources, including timber and minerals. France is the largest exporter of luxury goods worldwide, along with Italy with its Ferrari, Lamborghini, wine, and pasta. The Netherlands is famous for its flowers, dairy products, and vegetables. Switzerland is the undisputed leader in financial services, pharmaceuticals, and watchmaking. What are US famous for? Hollywood, chocolate bars, military equipment? In fact, many goods are produced under American brands that are consumed worldwide, including culture and technology. But perhaps the country's largest export is US dollars, and this is what keeps the American economy afloat. If everyone needs your money, then your economy is thriving. You see, the existence of the petrodollar system has created demand worldwide for others to buy American dollars and treasury bonds, because that's how the US fuels its economic growth. This has also led to the stability of its economy, lower interest rates, and liquidity in financial markets. But without the ability to export dollars, nothing would have happened. The US economy is very much like a balloon. Imagine a deflated balloon. This is the US economy in its normal state, and every time a problem arises, the US government simply pumps money into the economy. Because of this, inflation inevitably rises, and if we continue to pour money out streams, the balloon will simply burst. Then the economy will collapse because consumers won't be able to afford anything. But why hasn't this happened to America? Because they have this escape valve. Through it, they relieve pressure and release their dollars to the rest of the world, because they know the world needs this currency to buy energy. The system works, but only as long as the valve works properly. But what if it suddenly happens that the world no longer needs such a large flow of dollars coming out of the balloon? That's right, the balloon will simply burst. Greece is on the brink of default this evening, just hours away. Many consider such things almost inevitable. The UN reports that food prices tripled last year, and estimates 4 out of 5 Syrians now live below the poverty line. Since 2019, the Lebanese pound has lost more than 90% of its value. Prices for basic commodities have almost doubled. In February, annual inflation in Argentina exceeded 100% for the first time since 1991. It's in triple digits. Therefore, its expenses rise every time the exchange rate goes down. Small banks are bankrupt, but what's even more remarkable is that this situation creates a burden on the federal budget, and people have to pay more taxes to cover these higher interest rates. And if the dollar becomes completely unnecessary to other countries, then its value will decrease, and this will directly affect the lives of Americans, with cheap foreign goods and travel abroad will become many times more expensive for Americans. Now you understand why the Saudi Arabia's decision is so important for the global economy, and currently, the dollar as a reserve currency has reached its summer low. The US faces a serious question: how to combat this? Yes, they can raise the federal funds rate or the interest rate to attract more money for safekeeping, which they have done actually. But America can only raise the interest rate until this begins to impact its economy, consumers, small banks, and overall ability to borrow money. So, the outlook seems quite bleak. However, it is too early to bury the American economy, and it must be acknowledged that the statistical export of the American currency still remains quite powerful, because approximately 59% of world foreign exchange reserves are held in dollars. For the euro, this figure is 20, and for the Chinese yuan, only 3. According to the Atlantic Council, the dollar is used in 88% of currency exchange transactions. As for the Chinese yuan, which many consider a competitor to the dollar, just recently 73 central banks abandoned it in favor of buying more gold in US dollars. Moreover, the dollar is supported by the largest, most advanced, and powerful armed forces in the world, but it is difficult to say how long this dominance will last. The world has long been becoming less dependent on the dollar, and the Saudi decision is further confirmation of this. How much do you think the financial system will change, and what fate awaits the dollar in the near future? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching, and thanks to everyone who supports us. We are very pleased that you are helping our projects develop.